Good evening. Today we are going to be talking about racks. And I don't mean a grand, and I don't mean mammary glands. I mean ABLETON racks. Far less interesting in my humble opinion. However, I can't make content out of the other two. Unless... Can I do that? Is that allowed? Actually, I'm the godhead of this channel. I can do what I please. Yeah, racks can be a bit of a cheat code, only because it just speeds so much up. You know, I think about racks in the same way that I think about templates. So every time I open Ableton, I've got this sort of template already set up because it's taken out the stuff that I do every time I make a tune. And racks, you can do a similar thing, but just in terms of processing. So let's say, for example, you always put an EQ and a limiter on your vocal. You can just bring up this effects rack and already have all your settings like dialed in, and it just kind of helps you with a starting point. So to make an effects rack, all you have to do is get two plugins, highlight them both, and then Command G. That creates a group in an audio effects rack. So if you wanted to save it, you just open this little squiggly button down here, press this save, and then this saves into your audio effects rack channel here. But there are even more interesting things that you can do with racks. Let's just go through a few ways of making some really interesting things from racks. So what we could do, got this tune which is from an old Ketama song that I did. I will link the video here. The context doesn't really matter, but just to show you how we can do these racks, I've just got this little pause after the drop, and then we go into this, I don't know, this post or whatever. Right, so I've got this little bip. When I'm doing stuff like this, where I'm like filling a little bit of a gap and it wants to be a bit ethereal sounding, I will pretty much always use the same plugins. And I just got sick of doing that all the time. So I made a rack, and we're going to make a rack so I can show you how to do it, because there's some really cool ways that you can customize it. So let's put a saturator on, because I will tend to put a saturator. Let's put a delay. Let's put a reverb and maybe a redux. Let's see. So I'm just going to process a little bit first. Right, so that's pretty simple. And what you can do is you can just save that rack and it will be stored in your audio effects racks. But we can take it another step further. We can map some of these parameters to these macros, and that's where it can get really interesting. So if we click this map button, we can click on something like the drive and map that to our macro one. Now let's do the dry wet, the rate and the bits of this redux, the feedback of our delay. Let's do the dry wet of our delay. Let's also do the sync, and we can add a couple more of these macros down here with this plus button, and let's do the dry wet on the reverb. Let's start off with that. So at the moment, what you can do is, without having to open all of these, you can literally just change these knobs and that will change whatever's inside that rack. So when I'm changing the decay time of the reverb, it changes there. Another cool thing that you can do is you can map two separate parameters to the same macro. So let's say, for example, we wanted the dry wet of the delay and the dry wet of the reverb. We could do both of those to this dry wet. So now when we change this dry wet macro, it changes both this one and this one. So that makes it super helpful. I'm just going to undo that, because for now, I'm going to keep it all individual, because what you can do when you have them all individually like this is you can press randomize and it will just literally randomize all of those parameters. So instead of dialing it in yourself, you can just press one button and the whole of the sound will change. So let's hear what that sounds like. At the moment, it's a bit hit and miss because the parameters don't have any limitations. So the dry wet could be at 100%, the feedback of the delay could be at 100% or 0%. So what we can do to dial it in a bit so it's not so sort of all over the place, once we give it parameters to sit within, then it's not going to go too mad. So what we can do is we can press this map, and up here on these macro mappings, we can set those parameters. So this drive on the saturation, for example, at the moment, when this knob is all the way at 0, it's at minus 36, which is what this drive is here. When it's all the way up, it's at plus 36, which is what the limit of this drive is here. So this is the limitation at the moment. So if we take this up and then take this one down, now when our drive is at 0, the lowest point is minus 2.2, which is where this drive is down here. And then when we take it up to 100%, the drive's limit now is 9.6. So it will never go beyond those parameters. So let's dial this in. So let's say we're going to do the drive at 0, because that means there's no drive. And then let's say 10 decibels, so it doesn't ever get too insane. Maybe a bit more. Let's try 20. And then we can do the same for all these parameters. This delay, maybe we don't want the delay sometimes being 100%, because that will be a bit too washy. So I'll bring that down a little bit. Same with the reverb. The feedback of the delay, I definitely don't want too long. So let's turn the delay feedback all the way up here. And now the limit is 36%, which is pretty good. Maybe we could have it a little bit longer. Let's try that. Sample rate, again, we can maybe make that not so intense. Same with the bit depth. Reverb decay, maybe not too much either. So maybe something like that. We've just given it a little bit of limitation. So now the changes when we press randomize shouldn't be as intense. So let's have a little listen. So a little bit more usable. This is a super cool way of creating these weird and wonderful different sounds that you might not necessarily think to do, because they're all stacked on top of each other and you're just randomizing it. It spits out loads of interesting stuff. It's a really cool way of processing songs. So that's one way of working with effects racks. One thing I found that's super helpful, for example, let's say we've got this vocal here. So let's say, for example, we want to put a saturator on there. Once you start getting that nice crunch, the output is so much louder than it was previously. And I'm always dialing in the output like this to get them roughly at the same level. And it's a bit of a ball ache. So what you can do is assign both of those knobs to an audio effects rack. So if we do the same thing, we map our drive to macro 1 and our output to macro 1. So now when we move this one macro, we're affecting both of these at the same time. But as you can see, they're both linear. So we want them to be going in opposite directions. So when the drive goes up, the output comes down. So this is where we change it here. So rather than our max of our output being 0, the minimum being minus 36, we can invert those. So now when we increase the macro, the drive goes up and the output comes down. And I think a good way of really dialing this in is making sure that when this is all the way down, we want these two to land where they normally do when you just open the saturator. So normally they're both at 0. So let's change this to 0, and then normally our output is all the way up. So when you open saturator, as you can see here, our starting point is drive is at 0, output is at 0. And when our macro is all the way down, now our drive is at 0 and our output is at 0, because we've done these changes. So now when we increase the macro, the drive goes up and the output comes down. So that's super, super helpful, because now we don't have to worry about using those two knobs. You can pretty much just use this as one saturator and it will take the output down. So let's have a little listen. So obviously it sounds a bit insane, but that output has come down. Whereas before, if we're just increasing the drive, it just gets super, super loud and you have to dial in the output. So stuff like this is a really cool way of just making your flow just a tiny, tiny bit smoother and quicker. So I have actually made a few of these racks for myself to make it a little bit easier. So I'm just going to demonstrate a few of these to you quickly. I'm just going to use this random drum loop because I think that will help to be able to hear these racks a little bit better. So I've just got this wider plugin. If you want something wider, just turn it up. Easy. I've got this reverb rack that is super cool. So this is just 2 knobs, so you can have this dry wet and then you can just flick between these presets. So they're all ABLETON stock reverbs. I've just changed the parameters. So in the same way, like for example, you use Valhalla, I've got loads of presets in it. This is kind of a similar thing that I've tried to do with ABLETON reverb. So these are just a few presets that you can just toggle through. So let's have a little listen. So that just makes doing reverbs so much quicker and easier. And I have got Olive Smile, which is just Endless Smile, but with all Ableton stock plugins. Nice. I've got this saturator, which boils it down to 3 knobs, which makes it so much easier. So just dry, wet, drive, and the type. So really simplifies it down and makes it super easy to understand. I've got this bass enhance. I think the vibe is a little bit off for this kind of tune. I think it's going to work more with drum and bassy kind of stuff. And it's just like loads of stacks of reverb, saturator, overdrive, OTT, all just combined into one. So you can just kind of stick that on and make it more or less intense. So if we stick that on a sine wave, it goes from this to this. So really crunches it up, makes it sound much more intense and epic. This kind of thing I think would work on like really simple bass sounds like sine waves. You're effectively just heavily distorting with loads of different distortions. And then I've got this everything rack you can use on pretty much anything. So let's try it out on these vocals. So this is super simple. It's just a few parameters. We can just up those and see what that sounds like.
I'll reach for the
So just a really quick way of adding like some OTT, some distortion, some reverb and some delay. And we could, like we did before, we could randomize. And this you can pretty much put on anything, like even these synths. So before and after. Just gives him like that little bit of a vibe. And using something like this, especially when you're starting out doing a project and you're not necessarily honing in on all the nitty gritty details, having something like this just to plonk on things, to give it a bit of a vibe while you're actually like writing the song, I think is super helpful. So I have actually started a Patreon and all of these are going to be available to download. I think the lowest price you can put on Patreon is £3. So I'll put them on for £3, which I guess in comparison to actual plugins is absolutely nothing. I won't be adding any like extra content on Patreon for now. I might do in the future, but if anyone wants to just support the channel, because all of these videos I do for free, I upload every project I ever do for free. If anyone is willing and kind enough to help support the channel, I would be very, very grateful. And also hopefully that means that I would be able to put more time and effort into this in the future. So yeah, that'd be great if you guys could check that out. I will leave a link in the description. So I hope that's helped. Racks. With racks is one of those things, the possibilities are literally endless. So I would try loads of different variations of different plugins and just try and make your own racks. Because once you spend time doing those racks once, you will save yourself so much time in the future. So I'll definitely give it a go. Thank you very much for watching. I do hope it's helped. Please do like and subscribe and comment some things and have a look at the Patreon. Thank you very much. Love to your mothers.